Yeah, we're live to you back on Arise Xchange, and we're just bringing to you what Fitch Ratings has just published regarding First Bank of Nigeria. Fitch affirms FBN Holdings ratings at B- and a negative after board removal by the central bank. The rating agency, headquartered in London, has issued a new statement affirming the long-term issuer default rating, what you call the IDR, of FBN Holdings PLC and its primary operating subsidiary, First Bank of Nigeria, at B- with a negative outlook. Fitch Ratings says this reflects its view of the impact of the Central Bank of Nigeria's replacement of FBN Holdings and FBN boards, the identification of corporate governance failings, and the imposition of corrective measures at a tolerable rating level. That's the latest. Fitch Ratings holding the ratings B- on FBN Holdings and First Bank. These are part of the action we've seen so far in one of Nigeria's largest commercial bank and the oldest bank in Nigeria. Just take you up to where we are. Somalia has restored diplomatic ties with Kenya after 5 months. Within the banking sector in Kenya, the central bank has appointed the deposit insurer, that's the KDIC, to liquidate Charterhouse Bank Limited. Then the central bank has also released the commercial bank's credit officer first quarter report, January to March, showing the state of credit within the commercial banks in Kenya. Mombasa's tea auction, a slight increase in price, $1.85 per kilogram. And Ethiopia and the World Bank signed $200 million loan for a digitization program for one of Africa's most populous economy, north of the continent, the Horn of Africa, to be more precise. But we're sticking with the Africa construction market, which is expected to register a compounded annual growth rate of 6.4% between 2019 and 2024. And that was according to Reportlinker's Africa construction market report forecast. Breaking it down, East Africa has the largest number, followed by North Africa, accounting for the largest share in value terms, $148.3 billion. Egypt alone accounting for 46% of that project, worth nearly $80 billion, beating South Africa and Nigeria in terms of construction and infrastructure. But these construction and infrastructure projects are not free of disputes, as highlighted by delegates at this week's East Africa International Arbitration Conference, focusing on trends and disputes and how to resolve them. Let's chat to one of the conference delegates now, Andrew Sims, partner and head of construction and infrastructure at Alta Mimi and Company based in Doha. A good evening to you, Andrew. Welcome to the program.
Good evening from Doha.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you here. What were the key highlights of this one-day conference on construction and infrastructure trends and disputes in Africa?
Well, what we have to recognize, of course, is that, your audience will know very well, that Africa, obviously, as a continent, is very, very varied. And we've got all sorts of different economies at different stages, dealing with construction projects across multiple sectors, whether that's energy, tourism, roads, infrastructure. And so consequently, well, the clear message that came from the conference was this diversity. However, Africa, like any other place in the world, does nevertheless, in its construction market, have certain trends. Those are disputes which are happening everywhere, but perhaps there are certain themes that we addressed in the conference yesterday, particularly those which are having a serious impact on the progress of projects. And the ones that we were highlighting were, in particular, changes in the scope, an identified scope at the beginning of the project, but during the course of the project, the employer looking to change it in some way, and that having unforeseen consequences. Another aspect was late approvals, and obviously this is certainly when you're dealing with government contracts, there can be serious issues in relation to getting approvals through the bureaucracy. And of course, that has an impact on the ability of a contractor to progress the project. One issue, and it's particularly true in respect of, from my perspective as a lawyer, is contract interpretation. Simply, the parties have entered into a contract and they haven't necessarily understood what are the terms and conditions and the risks that they've actually. And as you might imagine, that ought to be feeding into price. And if you suddenly discover that either as an employer you haven't passed on a risk that you anticipate and you're getting significant claims from a contractor, that's going to be concerning. But equally the other way from the contractor's perspective. And then the final thing, and it's one that happens on projects up and down the continent, and that is where a project has been started in advance of the design having been settled. It's not an unusual an issue, but it is one of those things which occurs time and time again. Of course, parties are very, very keen to get a spade in the ground. But if you've got a project where the design hasn't been properly stress tested before you start work, inevitably there will be issues and there will be conflict between employers, contractors, subcontractors, all of which has an impact on progress on the project and potentially on price. So those were the issues that we were considering.
But are there infrastructure projects that are transforming the continent right now despite these disputes issues?
Undoubtedly. I mean, well, one of the things, of course, though, is that parties are invariably reluctant to identify and to make public the fact that they've got their issues, because it certainly doesn't help anybody. And you know, Africa is no different from any other jurisdiction. I mean, here in the Middle East, of course, there is invariably a desire to make sure that that issues during the course of the project don't make it into the media. What we've got in Africa are significant projects with external investment, and in large part it is in the interests of those parties to make sure that those disputes don't get into the public domain. And quite often the way in which that is achieved is that the dispute resolution process that the parties adopt, for a number of reasons, but this is one of them, is arbitration. And arbitration in an international context, and generally, it is a procedure which is a private procedure, so that it's often, the disputes are often out of the public eye, in contrast, of course, to certainly most jurisdictions where the public is entitled to know what's going on in a dispute that's being held in front of the courts.
So Andrew, have you and your colleagues in arbitration been busy? Are you seeing increasing dispute?
Yes.
In what areas?
No question.
Okay, so increasing in dispute. What are the chief causes here? You mentioned them a little bit earlier, but are they attracting some of the funding that should go into the projects, by the way?
Well, you know, a lot of projects, in general, people enter into contracts not anticipating that there are going to be disputes at the back end. It's that issue that nobody really wants to address. That said, construction disputes are an inevitable consequence of a major push on infrastructure development. And so, yes, up and down the continent, whether we're talking about the four broad regions of North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, there are disputes which are arising. Now, as part of your contract, you don't particularly want to dwell on the dispute resolution process, but in large part, international financiers and indeed international contractors will not be prepared to come to a project unless they are comfortable that if disputes do arise, they're going to get a fair hearing. And this then is a whole issue in relation to improving not only the reality of the justice that's available in front of the legal systems across the continent, but actually also how those legal systems are perceived. And unfortunately, Africa does have certain issues relating to how it is perceived. And that is another reason why quite often many of these disputes are dealt with by arbitration, which is arbitration which is ultimately held outside of the particular jurisdictions. I mean, let's face it, so there are big initiatives afoot, particularly ones which I'm very aware of in Egypt and also in Kenya, where there is a definite drive to improve what is available both in front of the court system, but also by way of arbitration, such that there isn't this sort of colonialization of arbitration, and that actually there is respect for the local laws and the quality of local justice, so that the disputes are retained within country rather than being sent to Paris, London, Singapore, or indeed to the Middle East.
On a final note, Andrew, and just about 30 seconds, where are we seeing the bulk of these disputes between a private sector to private sector companies, or between the government? There is okay, you got it.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Undoubtedly, there is a reluctance on large organizations, particularly Chinese organizations, to challenge the government. So generally speaking, these disputes are being between main contractors and their subcontractors. But that's not to say that there won't be in the future those where governments are entangled. It's all a question of degree and relationships.
Well, thank you so much for your time today on the show. Andrew Sims, partner and head of construction and infrastructure at Al Tamimi and Company in Doha.